And we are here at Capclave 2010, and with me is Laura Anne Gilman. Laura Anne, welcome to Fast Forward.
Thank you.
Welcome back to Fast Forward.
Indeed.
Now, you are a busy lady. You have 3, 4 different series moving along under 2 different names?
I have 2 series currently going, one that we've wrapped up, it's a continuing world, and a number of other sort of singleton projects, one of which, the paranormal romances are under the name Anna Leonard. Everything else is under my own name. Mm-hmm. And it's been busy.
Because right now out, you have the first book in your Cosa Nostradamus, in the spin-off
Yes.
of your Retriever novels of the Cosa Nostradamus series, and you have your new series, the Vineart War.
Yes.
One of the things in both of the books, actually most of the stuff you write that I really like is, I don't call it world building, it's society building. In Vineart War, it is amazing. You really have taken the basic premise of the book, which is magic and wine, and then built the society based on that, including a religion that all fits together, and the way the development of the characters is tied to wine as well, which is fascinating.
Well, part of it is that culture creates everything in a story. So when you start with the culture is based on X, X has to be a part of everything, even if it's not immediately obvious to the reader. Yeah.
There's magic in the wine, and that's the premise of the book. And so from that, there are the people that have the vineyards, that have the magic, and the way that society, that group of people, kind of regenerates itself is fascinating, because they all come from slaves.
Yes.
And you begin it with the main character as a slave. So how did you get to that point and wanting to do that with the society?
Part of it was the theory, which we hear a lot of, grapes, in order to really come to their fullness, need to be stressed. Now, what that really means in agricultural terms is you don't want the vines producing too many leaves. You want them producing fruit, saying, oh my God, we have to survive. We need to give more fruit in order to, so you give them harsher conditions. And that way you get the most fruit, you get the best yield. And I wanted that to be echoed in the culture that tends to them, in that the slaves have to be stressed so that their magic comes to the fore, rather than any other skill to let them survive, because a slave who understands the vines best will do best and will thrive. And that's where the vine arts come from. There was also an aspect of the historical culture, which is, as the books are told, the story evolves, that it was slaves originally who discovered that the magic was still in the vines. So there's a cultural aspect to it as well as a magical element, and it also helps separate the vine arts from the rest of society, which is some of the rest of society says, okay, slaves, no problem, whatever, and some are horrified, just as was actually happening in our equivalent of that history in the 14th century. But it is very much a part of the culture, and it's been a part of the culture for thousands of years. And it's been interesting playing with that, because I get to play with a slave who honestly isn't yearning for freedom, because he's gotten his freedom. It's the only freedom he knows. The lot of a slave is to be thus. And it's not politically correct, it's not positive, it's not friendly, it's not enjoyable, but it is very much a part of the culture. The harshness, the servitude, the limited options, this is all necessary to that world, and it's very real. And I've had people say, how can you have slaves? How can you not show that this is bad? I'm like, because in this culture it's not bad.
That's one of the things in the first book, at the beginning of the first book, I found fascinating, was the fact that Jersey, the main character, mm-hmm. doesn't consider his lot like, I am a slave, this is terrible, I must fight for my freedom. It was just what it was. This is the way life is. And you don't see that a lot.
I had to be true to how the characters, again, going back to culture creates characters, culture creates story. This is what was. And there may have been slaves who weren't happy or whatever, but this isn't the story about that. I can't even say he was happy. He wasn't happy.
He wasn't happy, no.
But did not accept, but they didn't become fine arts. So the story wasn't about them. There may be other stories about them. I don't know yet. We'll see.
We'll see. And his movement as he becomes a vine art and as he goes in, that being a slave is still there.
Very much so.
And even in the second book, as time has gone by and more things have happened and he's expanded as a character and found other people that he's his kind of Scooby Gang, that he's going around with, that's still, you can't get rid of that, really.
He probably, if life had gone, quote unquote, as normal for him, gradually he would have shed that and become a vine art and a master vine art and grown into it. Because of the way the story unfolds, things happen to him so fast, he's having to deal with not having gotten rid of some of the training he was supposed to shed and evolving into the next stage of magic user, of the adult he was going to become. He's being forced to be an adult and he's not. I really wanted to play with all these different characters, Mahalt and Eo and Kainem and Yerzy, of characters who are forced to be adults, are taking adult actions and adult repercussions, and yet emotionally, in a lot of ways, some of them are still children, seeing how they let go and what they keep. That transition, and at the very end of the trilogy, all of them have transited to that point of innocence being gone and having to have done things and made decisions that only adults should have to do.
Because what's going on could destroy the entire society. And part of that society is the religion and the relationship between political power and the magical power. And why don't you talk about that a little bit? That I found really fascinating, the way the religion developed and the way that kind of political aspect of the book is.
The setup, the creation myth, if you will, for this culture is once there were many gods, and there was the first growth, or the first vine, and it was all magic, and it was the vines, the grapes that came from that were incredibly powerful, and the vine mages were basically tyrants, and they were battling against each other just for the sheer sake of doing so. And the people cried out to the gods, as all these myths go. And the gods came down, and Zatim Sinwasher, Zatim came and remonstrated with, and they were going to bugger off. May need to blank that. And then Zatim was set upon by those who wanted to silence him. And as he's bleeding, because people have said, oh, it's a Christ figure. And my point is, the bleeding God is a long running. I mean, you go to any harvest god, and he's the son of a harvest god. So he's going forward on that. The blood changed the grapes and shattered and broke the first vine into all the legacies, which in French would be the cepages, the different varietals. So each grape only has one particular power. And nobody knew how to use them. And Zatim commanded that those who handle magic should only handle magic and stay out of the world, and those who have temporal power, those who have secular power, should not interfere with magic. They can buy magic from the magic users, but they cannot grow it, they cannot make it, they can only use the finished product, turning magic into a commodity. And the Sin Washers' heirs are those who are the priests, if you will, who are supposed to keep balance and remind everyone of the commandments that keeps the world from destroying itself. So there's this three-pronged society that's growing up that is, over thousands of years, keeping the land's Vin from destroying itself, from magic, from tearing everyone apart. It's a balance of power that, as the story begins, is starting to shake.
Right. And you mentioned Jersey's his friends that he meets. You have Mahot, is it? Who is a young woman from a family of political power.
Yes.
And you have Ao, is that?
Eo.
Eo, who is from a trader family, merchants, salespeople, con men a little bit?
No, they're very straightforward.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true. And then later on, it's what's the name? Kenham, who comes from more of a warrior,
Noble warrior. Yeah.
background, and they get together and are almost forced together through circumstance, and forge a really interesting relationship with each other, because they're deferring to each other on different levels, and taking power on different levels and in different reasons as well. So I like that whole of a number of people all kind of going through the coming of age.
I very much did not want it to be simply Jerzy story. Each of them have, especially since he is not comfortable taking the lead, he's never done it, he's not good with it, each of them is coming of age, even though they're at different points in their lives. Each of them has a strength. And there is a flow in the group. There is no leader, there is no follower. Each of them is bringing something to the dynamic, and they're learning from each other, and they're teaching each other things that they need to survive. That's what I love too much. This is not, yes, it's a quest novel, of course, it's a traditional, but it's very much a group effort, a collaborative effort. There's no way they could have done this, not necessarily even without each other, but they couldn't have done it without each of them taking the lead as needed, and each of them contributing the information and the knowledge that they have.
And that was, to me, part of the fun of the book, was the three and then four of them as they kind of push and pull on each other, and the bantering.
And they don't always like each other.
No, because you always have done good bantering. and as they kind of feel each other out as people, and there's kind of sexual overtones to it that were really interesting, because Jerzy's kind of almost asexual.
He is. He definitely is. Everything that he is given over to the vines, and that's made very clear in the third book. This is after years of writing romantic fantasy. It was kind of nice to write something where, even when there is a little touch of that, it's of it at the 15, 16-year-old trying to figure out who we are and how we react level, rather than actual relationships, sexual relationships. And it was fun, and also because Mahout is such a woman. In this culture, women have roles, they have strong roles, but they're very circumscribed, and there is an outlet, as any culture will have to have, for a woman who does not fit in those roles. And those are the solitaires.
Right.
Who basically get to make their own way, but they have to give up things also. And she is trying to find out where she belongs. And if she belongs with the solitaires, she has to give up things like a relationship and so forth. Finding out where she is comfortable is part of her journey.
Jerzy knows what he is. He's a Vineart. That's it. I mean, he knows that. Ao, he's a traitor. I mean, it's not just what he does; it's what he is. It's ingrained in him. And our noble warrior is a noble warrior.
True, except for the fact that in the third book, a lot of what happens is they have to give some of those things up. They have to change and evolve the same way that Jerzy has to change and evolve. So they end the story in completely different places from where they began.
Cool.
Because that's what happens. You think you know who you are, and in the end, maybe you're not. Circumstances demand that you adapt.
Yeah, and like in a number of your things, it's a little bit different here, because this is more of your kind of classic fantasy as opposed to an urban contemporary fantasy. Got some big nasty things and people that they're up against, and even in the second book, it's not really clear what it all is and what's going on with that. It's just you. And in the second book, I have to say, does not have second book of a trilogy problems.
Thank you.
You learn more and more about the culture and about the people, and it grows, and it doesn't feel kind of stuffed in.
Yeah.
Now, let's talk some about Cosa Nostradamus, the other major series you have going on. Ren and Sergei, Retrievers, story kind of over, basically. And so you did a spin-off series.
Yes.
Which is about Bonnie Torres, who was kind of a bit player in the main series. And they're setting up kind of a paranormal CSI kind of thing. And what I like is it's not something that's there. It's like, well, here's how it works. Here's what it is. And now here's the new ones. it's something that's never been done. And that I really kind of helps make it interesting as you see this evolving. But what took you to wanted to pick Bonnie as the character to do it on?
It wasn't. I wanted to do Bonnie because she's a fascinating character for me. She's very different from Ren. Ren was a woman in her 30s who knew exactly who she was, what she did. She had her crap together.
Well, up to a point.
To a certain point, yes. Until I started throwing things at her. And those were caper novels, and they were of a certain tone. Bonnie is a very young 20-something who thinks she has her stuff together and doesn't. And she's thrown in with a whole bunch of other people who don't have their, they're all 20s, in their 20s.
Bunch of kids.
Yeah, and being trained to do something that is very difficult, forensic magic is something that has not been done, not because it can't be done, but because the culture of magic is so individualistic and contrary and paranoid that very few people will actually submit themselves to anybody else's authority. And here they are coming in saying, we're not the judge or the jury, but we are, by God, going to say exactly what happened so that nobody can argue the facts. They can just argue the punishment. And this is driven by the founder's own trauma, which is referenced throughout the series, but it's one of those things. I know what happened, but you guys may not. The again, group dynamic of all of the pups is interesting to watch.
Yes, they're PUPI.
Yes.
Paranormal.
Private, unaffiliated, paranormal investigations.
Yes. You had to call them puppies.
I did. Well, it was originally a one-off sort of joke, and then it grew, and all of a sudden I realized, oh my God, I've got this whole series, and they wouldn't let me call it puppy, so which is why it's called PSI. Yeah.
They're fascinating characters. I mean, it's not that usual in like an urban contemporary romantic fantasy type of genre to have the main character be bisexual.
Yes, openly,
yeah.
unabashedly. She's a bit of a hedonist. She's a very
Which can get her into trouble.
Yes, she's a very kind-hearted, gentle individual, which again is completely different from Ren. She really wants to like and trust everyone, and I've matched her up with some people who are less so. And it's actually one of the things I'm getting to do is subvert one of the tropes of romance, which is she has what is in effect a soul bond with a member of the team, and neither of them want it. It's going to screw with the job, it's going to screw with the group dynamics, she doesn't like being told what to do, and he likes it even less. And they have to come to slow terms with how they're going to deal with this. And she's, as I said, she's in her early 20s. She doesn't want to settle down.
Yeah, none of them really are into that. And I got to tell you, Hard Magic, the first one of them, it's a wonderful book. It is so much fun and a good caper in it. You know, what they're trying to solve is really nicely done, and kind of I can see how that's going to lead into a lot more. And I'm afraid we're out of time, which goes quickly every time. But I want to thank you very much for taking time here at Capclave to sit down with us again. And we're going to do this again in not so long.
I'll make sure I have more books then.
Okay. Thank you. And so from all of us here at Fast Forward and at Capclave, it's Mike Zipser saying take care.